Charlie?
Although never convicted of murder itself, Charlie Manson represents the gargoyle head of the family, symbolic antithesis of the flower kid of the 60s. Some thought of Manson as Jesus Christ reborn, or the Son of Man. From the Spahn movie ranch empire on the night of August 8, 1969, a group of young hippies who viciously murdered, mutilated, and tortured Sharon Tate and her 3 guests. 2 nights later, they also murdered Mr. and Mrs. LaBianca. These were members in good standing of the Manson family.
Wow, it's still here. Wow, look at that.
What's that?
It's the Charlie Rock. It's been here as long as we've been coming here. We assume that the family did it. As you can see, it's a C and then an M, and it's been carved in here. And through erosion and lots of rain, it's still here. And of course, here is a cross.
Who did that?
We believe the original family members did it. John? Been here as long as...
Nobody really knows.
Nobody really knows. You know, it could be some prankster too, but we like to think it was the family. Anyway, welcome to the Spahn Ranch. It's now August 1994. In August 1969, on August 8th and 9th, there were the killings of Sharon Tate and her guests, and the second day, Lino and Rosemary LaBianca. The family stayed on this ranch in '69. At the time of those killings,
all the buildings are up there, but they burned down in 1970.
Yeah, the buildings are up there.
Were,
yes, on the other side of the road.
Charlie? I know it's you. Come on.
So what was going on here in this particular park?
I would say they were probably dropping acid. And...
playing music.
Playing cowboys and Indians and other games of theirs. The river was a river then. Now it's kind of a little stream, and they would go and occasionally bathe in there at that time in '69. What else would they have done here? Possibly had a picnic. As I said, they lived predominantly on garbage and handouts from Dennis Wilson.
The beach boy.
Yeah, they took up residence with him, and he paid for a lot of their medical and dental bills.
Why did he do that?
I guess probably because of the sex and the drugs. He already had the rock and roll.
A mechanical man, and I do the best I can because I have my family out. I am a mechanical boy. I am my mother's toy.
Acid was used in pot, if I'm correct.
Probably.
And speed was forbidden, although on the night of the...
It wasn't forbidden to Tex and Sadie.
Tex and Sadie had their own little stash jar, kind of, so to speak, and they were doing quite a lot of it, as we believe, on the night of August 8th, and probably before that for a few days. They were quite awake.
I think they all knew each other.
I do too.
You mean the people who did the killings and the victims?
Yes.
Well, before Sharon lived at the Tate house, it was Terry Melcher's house. And Terry Melcher was helping the family put out a record album. which he eventually decided not to do. And then Terry moved to the Malibu beach house, and Sharon and Roman rented it. And then Charlie went over there one time to see Terry, but Rudy and Sharon answered the door instead. So it's a total lie that they thought that Terry still lived there and that they were after him because of the record deal that didn't happen.
Oh, that's one of the explanations that isn't true, you mean?
Yeah.
And Terry Melcher was the record producer who also produced the Beach Boys, right? Wasn't that so?
Yeah.
Doris Day's son.
Is that so?
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
And then there's been times when Charlie claimed he had sex with Doris Day.
And you think that's true?
It's
Oh,
possible.
you should have seen the things he said about Jane Fonda. Ooh. That's more embarrassing than Jane does none, but we can't say.
No?
No. We'll just say it doesn't involve humans.
But the whole thing's extremely complicated, and there's all these missing pieces.
Are you still trying to figure out exactly what happened?
Yeah. And the other movies is like the Manson Family Movies. There's rumors that they stole video equipment from some television station and that they made movies of their own right here, a lot of them right here at the Spahn Ranch.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's a movie called Manson the Documentary. And some of that may have actually been shot by the family. And then there's a story that they did things like recreated the Tate murders. And that's what my movie, Manson Family Movies, is all about. What if the Manson family did do these recreation movies? After the murders, and when they found out that Tex Watson and the Manson family had been involved in it, and then there was like all these headlines claiming that Manson caused all these other people to kill. I got really interested in it because I thought that was extremely ridiculous.
Why did you think that was ridiculous?
Because people do what they want to do, and they do it. They're responsible for their own actions.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be basically some kind of witchcraft if somebody could actually cause other people to kill.
If you insist on interrupting this court, I'll have no choice but to have you removed. Call the next witness.
I'll have you removed. I got a little system here.
Mr. Manson, you are instructed to silence yourself. Call the next witness.
Do you think I'm kidding?
I was 13 years old, and I read the paper every day before going to school. And those days only courtroom sketches were allowed. It's quite different now with court TV. And I remember quoting Charlie at the dinner table at night for my parents, much to their chagrin. But a lot of things that he had to say were, I don't know, slightly offbeat, metaphysical. They made sense in a way. They made sense to the youth of the time period.
What kind of things, for instance?
I think one that's kind of funny would be no sense makes sense, or it wasn't my children that came at you with knives, it was your children, which I thought that was kind of good. And it was interesting when the trial would go on that without cues or anything. The three females, Susan Atkins, Leslie Van Houten, and Patricia Krenwinkel would rise and sing Charlie songs or spout things about pigs and stuff like that. And what else? During the trial. They did a lot of shenanigans. Sometimes they weren't allowed in the courtroom.
The Nixon statement.
Yeah.
What was that?
Charlie snuck a newspaper into the courtroom and opened it up so the jury could see it, and the headline was Nixon declares Manson guilty. And then all the girls jumped up and said, the president has declared us guilty. Why go on with the trial?
Hail Krishna, hail Satan, hail Manson. I believe that Manson is an incarnation of Krishna, Vishnu, and all of the gods in general. Manson is an interesting character in the way that he's very godly in what he says. He says that you should become nothing and become a void. And that's what life is actually all about before anything started. And when he predicted the race war, it actually happened. If you look at the Los Angeles riots, which everyone heard about all over the world, Manson had predicted that over 25 years ago. And that happened here in Los Angeles, where Helter Skelter started. We're at the El Coyote restaurant on Beverly Boulevard here in LA, which is where the Last Supper occurred. This is where we go on our annual pilgrimage of Helter Skelter Night, which is a religious pilgrimage for us every August 8th. This is the last place where Sharon Tate, Abigail Folger, Jay Sebring, and Wojciech Frykowski, the ones that died on Helter Skelter Night, had their Last Supper. Helter Skelter actually means that everything is going to go into complete chaos before everything pure starts happening again and a new race of people are reborn, super people.
But isn't it kind of sick to celebrate, people who are being killed?
I think it's holy because it's the start of the new millennium. It's Helter Skelter, and it did have to happen no matter what. It was their karma. We like calling it the Last Supper because it is an ironic phrase. It was the Last Supper for Christ and it was the Last Supper for Sharon. But there is no comparison with Sharon and Christ. And it was actually a bad Last Supper because the food's terrible here. So they died for the bad stomach.
One year, shortly after Christmas, I got even with some of those kids who were laughing at me. I had spent Christmas with my grandparents. My only present for the year was a hairbrush, a Superman hairbrush. As I opened the present, my grandmother said, if you brush your hair with it, you will be able to fly like Superman. Young fool that I was, I carried that brush around with me for days and was constantly brushing my hair. I'd jump off porches, anything with a little elevation, and really expected to soar in the air like Superman. I never did fly, and to this day, that was the only lie that my grandmother ever told me. The kids in the neighborhood rubbed things in even more by showing me all of their presents. They had toys of all kinds, wagons, trains, cowboy hats, and chaps. Even now, I'm not sure if I just resented being laughed at or if I was jealous of what they had and I didn't. But one day I rounded up all of their toys I could find and carted them home with me. I stacked up some wood and threw the toys on top and started a fire. The kids were mad. Some cried, others threatened me, and their parents called the sheriff. And though I wasn't taken to jail, it was my first encounter with the police. I was 7 years old.
That was Manson in his own words.
Right. That's his formative moment, I believe, that led to all the rest of what he's known for today.
How did you get interested in Manson?
Well, I think that I've always been interested in him since I was a teenager, since it happened in '69. I was 14. Then, many years later, I was writing a screenplay, and I had a character that I realized was Manson. So at that point, I started reading about him. I think the life of Manson has fascinating correlations to the life of Christ, for instance. And, you know, he was a hairy man living out in the desert with a group of followers that would, you know, do anything for him, and he would philosophize and tell parables and tell stories all day long. It's also interesting that Manson was not his given name, I believe. It was a name that he adopted at a certain point, or it may have been, I think, the name of his grandparents. But when you look at Manson, son of man, it's easy to see where his followers started thinking of him as Christ and would do anything for him. Apparently, when he was arrested and they asked him to sign his name, I think he signed Jesus/Satan. And he thought of himself as incorporating sort of both of those. And I've read a lot of Eastern philosophy, and in Hinduism, and especially in Hinduism, there's an awareness of the duality in our psychology of the dark and the light, and that in Hinduism there are gods that are both destructive and life-giving. In our society, we've tended to break off that duality and made God and Jesus all good, and have banished the dark side to the underground and called that Satan and called that the devil. But I think one thing that Manson's followers kind of understood was the real makeup of human psychology. To me, that doesn't justify that they killed people, and that they should have found some other way of dealing with, you know, the dark urges.
What do you think is going to happen to Manson? He's going to spend the rest of his life in jail, and then what?
Well, Manson, as he said, is already dead. He made that statement. The Manson that was a child and grew up in a reformatory and in prison is dead. He has become, I guess as the Scientologists call it, clear. He's a fully realized soul. So his physical body, yes, will spend the rest of his life in prison, I believe, unfortunately, because that's what society has done to him. They've crucified him again, the second time.
When I started reading Manson's philosophy and interviews, and then I finally got a hold of some uncut interviews, because the television stations would chop them all up and use like 3 minutes and just use all these sound bites, like him saying, "So what's wrong with murder?" out of context. But I realized that he was one of the greatest philosophers since Nietzsche. And I was initially interested in it, as we went into earlier, because I thought the idea was absurd that somebody could cause all these people to go out and kill for them for basically no reason at all. One of the main things is that he was always saying that everyone's responsible for their own actions, and you can't blame anything on anybody else. You do what you just decide to do. And another interesting thing was, he said, "I'm the guy that places the mirrors at the end of your road," which sort of goes into the Zen Buddhist thing of the only thing you can perceive is yourself, because you're always looking in the mirror. Because most people are blaming everything on other people, or on the devil, or on Jesus, or on all these other things, rather than where the true blame lies, which is with themselves. Like when Tex ran into problems with his drug dealings, Charlie told him to go deal with it. And that's how one of the main reasons the murders came down. And if Tex telling Tex to deal with his own problems, and then Tex goes out and kills people. And then the media and society goes around claiming that Manson basically forced Tex to go out and kill all these people.
So you don't see Charles Manson as a murderer?
Well, he's never murdered anybody.
Do you condemn the people who did the killings?
Well, Tex Watson was basically a first-degree murderer, and I don't particularly think he should have been executed behind it, because it's more interesting to have him around.
Why?
It's a really interesting phenomenon. He's been doing all these books and tapes and videos that are certainly interesting to look at, and he claims that Jesus has forgiven him for everything, and it brings in that whole thing, which basically says that people can get away with absolutely anything and then blame it on the devil later on, and Jesus will forgive them, and they've gotten away with murder. There was this really incredible thing that Pat Robertson said, because Tex Watson was interviewed on the 700 Club one time, and for the introduction, or actually it was at the end of it, Pat Robertson announced...
Who's Pat Robertson? Sorry.
He's this major fundamentalist preacher who became close to being elected the U.S. president.
Mm-hmm. So what did he say?
He said, "You didn't kill a pregnant woman and smear her guts all over the walls, but this man did, and Jesus has saved him. Think what he can do for you." And that's sort of one of the ultimate examples of the massive schizophrenic breakdown at the end of the 20th century.
What can you tell us about your video catalog?
Well, originally it started off as every Manson-related thing that I could find, and I started trading with people, and I ended up trading with people all over the world, and I started getting huge amounts of, like, LSD movies and satanic movies, and I started collecting unavailable stuff by a lot of my favorite directors, like Zyberberg and Fassbinder, and Robert Downey.
Could you say that you are fascinated by death?
Not at all. I mean, personally, I find it an extremely annoying idea. And there's so much stuff to do. Studying why people get into killing and what their motivations are is certainly fascinating. Last night I was watching 5 hours of the Jeffrey Dahmer trial. And what nobody seemed to be getting is that all of his reasons for eating people were the exact same reasons that all these primitive societies had for doing it. And in the primitive societies, it was just an accepted part of daily life. But now people are pretending that nothing like that ever happened, and it's incomprehensible, and nobody can understand it. But Jeffrey Dahmer was just getting into his primal state desires. Like in the Aztec civilization, it was so institutionalized that it was the only reason they fought wars, to get victims for sacrifice, because it just became just an all-encompassing obsession. Well, this current interest is basically just rather negative, because it's just a combination of people trying to be trendy and this death culture getting bigger. Because it seems like, at least on a primal level, a lot of people really believe that there's 5 years left, it looks like. I mean, it is pretty amazing that it's only 5 years until 2000. But then it gets into whose calendar you're using and all that sort of thing. But supposedly somebody like Reagan actually believed in it.
In what?
Armageddon. That all the righteous Christians are going to literally float up into the sky and go to Jesus up in heaven, and everybody else is going to be burned up on earth.